Officer Ethan Cole was driving through the blistering Nevada desert when he saw something hanging from a twisted cottonwood tree. As he stepped out of his cruiser, the wind stilled, and time seemed to pause. As he got closer, his breath caught. It was a dog, a German shepherd, barely alive, strung up by its legs and left for dead. He cut the rope with trembling hands and froze, the scar on its chest. The bent left ear. It was Kaiser, his canine partner who vanished 2 years ago during a failed drug raid. Everyone said the dog had died, but now he was here, broken but breathing. What had happened during those lost years? Who had taken Kaiser, and why? The truth would unravel a buried trail of crime, cruelty, and something even darker, a cartel that used dogs like him to smuggle death across borders. What happened next will restore your faith in loyalty and justice. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let us know how far this story travels. The sky above Dry Pine, Nevada, was a thin sheet of gray-blue when Officer Ethan Cole rolled down the window of his patrol truck. The desert was waking slow. Dust swirled over the cracked earth. Wind tugged at dead branches, and the first touch of morning sun cast long copper shadows. A storm had blown through the night before, leaving the landscape raw and silent. Ethan, 36, leaned forward in his seat, letting the dry air sting his face. He was a man built for quiet things, broad-shouldered, dark-browed, with a steady stillness that people in town trusted but rarely invited for dinner. His brown hair was cropped short, his steel-gray eyes carried weight, and his badge, tarnished at the edges, had seen more grief than glory. He wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a routine patrol along Mesquite Trail, the forgotten edge of Pine County where cell phone signals died and secrets stayed buried in sand. But then he saw it. Something was swaying beneath the lone cottonwood tree ahead, the only tree for miles, a shape hanging like a broken flag. He slowed the truck, squinted. His breath caught. It wasn't a man. It was a dog. A German shepherd, dangling upside down by its hind legs, body limp, fur caked in dust and dried blood. The rope was frayed, tied cruelly high to the branch. A few black birds circled overhead. Ethan was out of the truck in seconds. "God almighty," he muttered. He approached slowly, hands raised like he was calming a wild thing. The closer he got, the more brutal it became. The dog's chest rose in weak, shallow breaths. Its left ear was folded permanently downward. Scars ran across its ribs like old war stories, and in its eyes, barely open, burned a flicker of something terrifying. Recognition. Ethan froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." The dog made a sound, a soft, croaked bark. It lifted its paw, just barely, and let it fall again. Kaiser. 2 years ago, during a narcotics bust gone wrong in Elko County, Kaiser, his canine partner of 5 years, had vanished in a storm of bullets and confusion. Ethan had called his name until his throat bled. They'd searched for days. The sheriff's office eventually declared him dead. They even held a memorial. Ethan hadn't spoken at it. Couldn't. Now, somehow, impossibly, he was here. The knife came out of Ethan's belt instinctively. He reached up, hands shaking, and cut the rope in 2 swift strokes. Kaiser fell into his arms like a sandbag. Dead weight, hot breath wheezing through cracked lips. Ethan knelt on the ground with him, cradling his body, whispering low, "I've got you, buddy. You're okay. You're okay now." Kaiser stirred, his paw twitching against Ethan's wrist. The pads were worn raw, the nails split. He was skin and bone beneath the matted sable fur, and yet he was alive. "I thought I lost you," Ethan said, his voice breaking. A voice called out from nearby. "Well, I'll be damned. That him?" Ethan looked up fast, protective, but relaxed slightly when he saw Hank Rourke, a grizzled local in his late 60s, stepping slowly over a ridge with a lever-action rifle slung over his shoulder. Hank lived alone in a shack 3 miles out, kept goats, smoked cigars that smelled like turpentine, and knew every rustle in the dirt. Hank was tall and wiry, with a sharp squint and a voice like sandpaper. He wore a torn brown coat, dusty boots, and a battered fedora that hadn't come off his head since the Nixon era. "Didn't mean to scare you," Hank said, stopping a few feet away. "Been watching you kneel over that dog for near 5 minutes now." Ethan didn't look away from Kaiser. "I know this dog." "Oh yeah? He was mine. K9 unit. Lost him 2 years ago." Hank whistled low. "Well, hell, that's a long time for a dog to be lost." Ethan nodded. "Or taken." Hank scratched at his beard. "Saw a black SUV out here last night. No plates. Parked by that tree for a while. Thought it was poachers. Didn't see no lights. Then it drove off fast." Ethan stiffened. "Did you get a look at them?" "Nope. Just silhouettes. Left something behind, apparently." Ethan stood, lifting Kaiser with both arms. The dog didn't protest, didn't even whimper, just stared at Ethan with tired, dark eyes. "I need to get him back to town. See the vet." "Of course." Hank stepped back, respectful. "You come by later, I'll draw you a map. Might be able to trace the tracks before they vanish." Ethan nodded, grateful but focused. "Thanks, Hank." He opened the back door of the patrol truck and gently laid Kaiser down on a thick emergency blanket, tucking it under his frame. He placed a bottle of water next to him, tilted slightly to drip slowly onto the dog's tongue. Kaiser blinked. His tail gave the faintest twitch. Ethan closed the door and sat behind the wheel, glancing at the rearview mirror. "I've got you now," he said softly. The engine started with a cough of dust and roared to life. Ethan steered the cruiser back onto the road, heading toward Dry Pine and the station. The wind picked up behind them, tugging at the frayed end of the rope still hanging from the cottonwood tree. But the desert didn't speak. It only watched as a man and his ghost rode back into town. The wind had faded by the time Ethan's cruiser rolled into the gravel lot behind the Pine County Sheriff's substation. A modest, one-story structure with sun-bleached siding, a sagging flagpole, and an outdated green sign that read, "Protect and Serve" beneath chipped paint. The building sat on the edge of Dry Pine, far from the sleek precincts of Carson City. Here, everything smelled like old coffee, dust, and resignation. Ethan eased the patrol truck to a stop and stepped out. The sun had climbed higher now, beating down on the desert with quiet fury. Inside the vehicle, Kaiser was barely conscious, still wrapped in the tan emergency blanket. His breathing was raspy, but steady. Ethan reached in, rested a hand on the dog's neck. "Almost there, buddy." He pushed through the rear entrance with Kaiser cradled in both arms. The air conditioning inside the station was weak, but still a relief. As he walked down the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the scent of antiseptic filled the narrow corridors. At the end of the hall stood Clara Moore, the youngest officer on the force, 28, lean, sharp-featured, with a long strawberry blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail under her standard Navy patrol cap. She had pale skin dotted with freckles and a small scar on her left temple, a souvenir from a foot pursuit that ended badly 2 years ago. Clara was known for her no-nonsense efficiency, quick wit, and an almost childlike tenderness when it came to animals. When she saw what Ethan was carrying, her clipboard fell from her hands. "Kaiser?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. Ethan stopped in front of her, the dog limp in his arms. "It's him." Clara blinked, tears instantly rising. She reached out, brushing her fingers across Kaiser's muzzle. The dog flinched at first, but then his nose twitched and his eyes flicked toward her. Recognition flickered. "Oh my God," Clara said, stepping back as her voice caught in her throat. He was declared dead." "I know. I used to train with him, remember?" she said quickly, as if Ethan could forget. "Back when I was just the K9 intern, he used to steal my granola bars. He always snuck into my locker somehow." Ethan nodded, his voice quieter now. He remembers. They carried him to the infirmary room, a repurposed storage closet with a metal exam table and an overhead surgical lamp that flickered when turned on. Clara stepped out and called in the local vet. 15 minutes later, Dr. Harold Green, the town's only veterinarian, arrived with his sleeves rolled and his expression tight. Green was in his early 50s, short and round, with thin hair combed carefully over a balding crown and glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. Despite his grumbling tone, he had the gentle hands of a man who had delivered more calves than kittens. He ran gloved hands over Kaiser's body, frowning deeper with every inch. "This dog's been through hell." "I need to know everything," Ethan said. Green nodded. He pressed his fingers gently around the dog's abdomen, pausing when Kaiser growled weakly. "Here," Green said, pointing to the lower ribs. "Scar tissue. There's an incision here, another one on the chest. Old, but precise. Surgical." "Surgical?" Ethan repeated, tension in his voice. "Yep. Someone opened him up, closed him clean. Not vet work, though. No tattoo, no microchip. The scars don't match any recovery procedure I know. These were made to access internal cavities, abdomen, thorax, then sealed and stitched in a hurry." "Drug mules?" Clara whispered. Her eyes went wide. "They used him." Green grimaced. "Wouldn't be the first time. Dogs get smuggled across the border just like people. Hide narcotics inside, patch 'em up, send 'em running. When the job's done—" Ethan didn't finish the sentence. His fists clenched. Clara sat on the metal stool, staring at Kaiser as if her heart were splintering. He was trained to trust people. Someone turned that against him. They cleaned his wounds, administered fluids, and gave him pain relief. Clara worked silently, her hands careful and sure, whispering small encouragements as she dabbed at the blood crusted on Kaiser's paws. Then it happened. As Ethan stepped toward the supply cabinet to fetch more gauze, Kaiser suddenly lifted his head, nose twitching, then let out a low, broken growl. "What is it?" Ethan asked, startled. The growl turned into a sharp, guttural bark. Kaiser's eyes locked on the corner of the room, a storage shelf cluttered with boxes and evidence bags. Clara followed his gaze. "Wait, is that—" She crossed the room quickly and pulled down a black nylon satchel labeled Case Number 177C, a drug seizure from a few weeks prior, still pending transfer. Kaiser growled louder, straining weakly toward the bag. Ethan opened the satchel and dug through its contents. Inside were heat-sealed packages of white powder and a half-empty bottle of hand sanitizer used to mask the scent. Kaiser pawed at the edge of the table, nose pointed at the bag. "He knows?" Ethan said, eyes narrowing. "He recognizes the scent." Clara turned to him. "That means the drugs they used. They're from the same batch? Or the same supplier?" Ethan zipped the bag shut and looked down at Kaiser. "You remember where you've been, don't you?" The dog let out a faint, tired whine and collapsed back onto the blanket. Clara knelt beside him again. "He's trying to help." Ethan stared at the scar along Kaiser's chest, now clean and pink under the antiseptic. "He's not just a witness. He's evidence." Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering along the station windows. Inside, Ethan felt something harden in his chest. Not anger, but resolve. "We're going to find who did this," he said. "I don't care how deep it goes." Clara nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. "Then let's start with the files on that satchel. Case 117C. I'll pull the chain of custody. And call in the DEA liaison," Ethan added. "Tell them we've got something they need to see." Kaiser let out a final, soft huff of breath, his eyes slipping shut as sleep took hold. Not out of fear, but safety. And, for the first time in 2 years, Ethan felt like something broken was starting to click back into place. The desert always changed after sundown. Heat gave way to a biting chill, and shadows spilled across the sand like spilled ink. Ethan stood at the edge of a dried arroyo, his flashlight cutting a thin blade through the gloom. Kaiser walked slightly ahead of him, his steps slow but focused, nose low to the ground. The scars along his ribs caught silver in the moonlight. He hadn't barked once since they left the substation, but his eyes stayed alert. There was something about being back on the job, even in his weakened state, that lit a spark behind them. They had followed the scent trail for nearly 2 miles past the outskirts of Dry Pine. The black nylon satchel from Case 117C had a faint but lingering odor, synthetic chemicals and something bitter, something almost metallic. Kaiser had caught the scent before Ethan could even open the bag fully. Now they were walking that trail, drawn by instinct and memory. The wind whipped across the desert, stirring the dirt around an old barbed wire fence. Up ahead loomed a low, rusted structure. An abandoned storage warehouse, its corrugated metal roof slanted like a shrug, half of its windows shattered. A battered sign above the door read Sage Freight Co. in faded red letters. Ethan approached cautiously, his Glock drawn and held low. Kaiser paused at the door, sniffed once, then sat, giving a soft huff. Ethan took that as a signal. No one inside. He gently pushed the door open. It groaned loudly. Dust curled in the air, swirling in his flashlight beam. The interior was mostly empty, just cracked concrete floors, rusted shelving units, and a few busted crates. But the far wall caught his attention. Scattered along the back corner were several empty burlap sacks, stiff and stained. Ethan knelt beside them, brushing his glove across the fabric. A faint white residue clung to the fibers. He didn't need a field test to know what it was. "Kaiser," he whispered, and the dog limped forward, sniffing each sack. At the last one he stopped, growled low, and began scratching at the ground near the base of the wall. Ethan moved closer. There, half buried under a plank, was a blood-stained cloth, torn and faded, but fresh enough to have not come from decay. Ethan pulled it free with forceps, bagged it carefully, then shone his light across the rest of the floor. No footprints, no tire marks. Whoever had used the warehouse had wiped their trail well. Then a sound. A soft scuffle from the shadows behind the shelving. Ethan stood immediately, weapon up. "Who's there?" Silence. Then another shuffle. He stepped around the rack, flashlight raised, and found a boy curled into the corner, shielding his face with his arms. Hey, easy," Ethan said, lowering the gun. "I'm not here to hurt you." The boy looked up slowly. 14, maybe 15. Slim build, sun-darkened skin, short black hair matted with sweat and dirt. His eyes were wide, guarded, but intelligent. He wore a red hoodie 2 sizes too big, jeans stained at the knees, and torn sneakers barely held together by duct tape. "I didn't take anything," the boy said quickly, his voice laced with a soft Mexican accent. "I was just sleeping here. I didn't know it was police." Ethan kept his tone calm. "You live nearby?" The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "Name?" "Luis." "Last name?" He didn't answer. Ethan looked at him closely. The kid was thin, underfed, and his hands trembled slightly. But there was no drug haze in his eyes. He wasn't high, just scared. Kaiser stepped forward, sniffed at Luis's shoes. The boy flinched. "He won't bite," Ethan said. "His name's Kaiser." Luis stared. "That dog. He doesn't look okay." "He's recovering. Like you." Luis looked down, silent for a moment. Then, almost as if the words had been waiting to fall out of him, he said, "My dad used to work for them." "For who?" "The men who used this place. They paid him to carry stuff across the border, hide it in tires, sometimes in cages. One time, they made him cut open a dog and sew things inside. He hated it. But they said they'd hurt us if he didn't. He died last year, shot in the back." Ethan didn't speak, just listened. Luis swallowed hard. "They told me if I didn't do the same, they'd come for me. So I ran. I've been hiding here a week. I didn't know the dog was yours. I didn't do that to him. I swear." Ethan nodded slowly. "I believe you." Luis looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "What do I do now? I don't want to go back. They'll kill me." Ethan holstered his gun. "You're not going back. You're coming with me. You'll be safe." The boy seemed to sag with relief. Kaiser, as if on cue, stepped forward and gently nudged the boy's leg with his nose. Luis smiled, just barely. Ethan placed a hand on Luis's shoulder. "Let's get you both out of here." Outside, the wind had stilled again. The stars were thick above the horizon, blanketing the sky like shattered glass. Ethan opened the back of the cruiser. helped Luis in, then lifted Kaiser gently onto the seat beside him. The dog leaned slightly into the boy, as if sensing something fragile that needed guarding. Ethan slid into the driver's seat, checked the mirror, then started the engine. They drove off into the night, the trail behind them marked by sacks, scars, and a boy who had no one left but was still choosing to survive. The morning after the warehouse discovery, Dry Pine wore a different silence. Not the kind that came with peace, but the heavy hush before a storm, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Inside the sheriff's substation, fluorescent lights buzzed softly as Ethan sat at his desk, the call already placed, the weight of the previous night still hanging in his bones. Luis was resting in the cot of the back holding room, wrapped in a clean blanket and snoring softly. Clara had brought him cocoa and a pair of her younger brother's old sneakers, the only pair they had close to his size. He hadn't spoken much after the ride back, but his eyes had held something new. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the outdated desktop computer humming in front of him. His hand hovered over the case file labeled K9204. Kaiser, status, deceased, now reopened and very much alive. A knock came at the front door. Not urgent, not timid. Steady, measured. Clara opened it and stepped back instinctively as a tall man filled the doorway. Special Agent Dean Wallace stood 6'4", broad-shouldered, mid-50s, African-American, clean-shaven except for a salt-and-pepper beard kept neatly trimmed. His dark navy suit was pressed to perfection, and his ID badge was clipped to his breast pocket. Beneath the tailored clothes and quiet demeanor was a man who had seen too much, buried most of it, and used the rest like fuel. He nodded at Clara with respectful calm. "Agent Wallace, FBI. Here for Sheriff Cole." Clara motioned toward the office. "Right through." Ethan rose as Dean entered, and the two shook hands. Firm, measured. "Heard the voice on the phone," Dean said, "but seeing that file that reopened, I had to come myself." "You're not going to like what we found," Ethan replied, "or where it leads." Dean's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "Walk me through it." Ethan laid out everything. The recovery of Kaiser, the surgical scars, the bloodied cloth, the empty sacks, and Luis, especially Luis. Dean listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When Ethan finished, Dean folded his arms and leaned against the window. Dogs, used as couriers, aren't new, but this sounds like someone went pro. Seamless trail erasure, patterned smuggling, tied ends. "We think Kaiser was one of several. There might be more," Ethan added, "still in use or buried out there." Dean turned to him. "And this kid, Luis?" Ethan nodded. "He's scared. Lost his father to the same group. I don't think he's lying." Dean glanced toward the back hallway. "Then we'll put him under protective observation. He could be a key witness, maybe even a link to the top." Clara stepped into the office quietly. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, holding something small in her gloved hand. "But I found this." She walked forward and laid it on the desk, a weathered leather collar, old and cracked, with a single rusted tag that simply read K9 Unit 204. Ethan recognized it instantly. "I was sorting through the gear we removed from Kaiser when he arrived," she explained. "The old collar was stuffed inside the emergency bin. Didn't look like much, but then Kaiser, he started scratching at the evidence locker where I'd put it." Ethan leaned forward. "What's inside?" "I didn't see anything at first, but then I felt a ridge behind the tag." She turned the collar over, revealing a small flap stitched unevenly along the inner lining. Clara pulled at the thread carefully with tweezers. A tiny compartment opened, and inside was a black USB drive, no wider than a fingernail. Dean raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me a retired K9 just found a concealed drive in his own collar?" Clara smiled faintly. "Guess retirement didn't suit him." Ethan inserted the drive into the computer. After a pause, a file popped open. No words, just a map. Aerial satellite imagery, with red marks along dirt roads and ravines spanning southern Nevada to the Arizona border. Some were labeled with codes, others with dates. One icon blinked with a timestamp from 3 nights ago. The same night, Kaiser was dumped. Dean narrowed his eyes. They were using him as a tracker. Like a living GPS? Ethan said. Hide the intel on him, dump him when the job's done. Clara shook her head in disbelief. Why not destroy the caller, though? Maybe they thought he'd die out there, Ethan said darkly. Or maybe they were arrogant. Either way, they didn't expect him to live. Dean studied the map. This gives us a smuggling trail, multiple drop points. If we correlate this with known cartel routes, we'll find their hub, Ethan finished. Kaiser stirred from the dog bed in the corner, still weak, but alert. His ears twitched, and he lifted his head, eyes tracking their movements with quiet focus. Clara stepped over and knelt beside him, running a hand gently along his side. You knew, she whispered. You carried this the whole time. Dean turned back to Ethan. You ready to dig deeper into this? Ethan didn't hesitate. We already started. Dean nodded. Good, I'll contact the Phoenix field office. We'll need to coordinate cross-jurisdiction. Outside, the desert sun climbed higher, casting long shadows against the old substation walls. But inside, for the first time in days, something felt less directionless. A map, a witness, a dog who refused to die, and a trail that had waited just long enough for someone to follow it. Dry pine slept quietly beneath a moonless sky. The desert around Ethan Cole's house stretched into darkness, broken only by the whisper of wind through brittle sagebrush and the distant cry of a coyote. Ethan's home sat on the edge of town, a modest, one-story ranch house with a wraparound porch, an old windmill creaking at the back, and a rust-colored pickup truck parked beside the barn. The place had once belonged to his father. It wasn't much, but it was private, or so he'd always thought. Inside, the lights were low. Luis had fallen asleep on the worn leather couch, curled into a ball beneath Ethan's spare deputy jacket. A half-eaten grilled cheese sat on the coffee table next to a can of root beer. Ethan had promised him safety. That promise weighed heavy tonight. Kaiser lay near the fireplace, resting but watchful. His breathing was still labored from the wounds, but his ears remained alert, shifting at the softest creaks in the house. The firelight cast flickers across his coat, revealing the pale scars along his chest and sides. The old dog looked tired, but his eyes still burned with purpose. Ethan was in the kitchen, double-checking the deadbolt on the back door when Kaiser let out a low, guttural growl. Then came a sound, soft at first but clear, gravel crunching outside. Ethan moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. Headlights. No engine. No voices. He slipped into the living room, gently tapping Luis on the shoulder. Kid, wake up. We've got trouble. Luis sat up instantly, sleep still clinging to his eyes. What? Stay low, Ethan ordered. He reached behind the couch and pulled out the shotgun he kept hidden in the wall recess. Kaiser rose to his feet slowly, his tail stiff, hackles raised. His nose pointed toward the front door. There was a knock. 3 short raps, followed by a pause. Then 2 more. Too clean. Too calm. Ethan didn't answer. He gestured for Luis to crawl into the hallway and stay down. Then he crept to the front window and peeked through the slit in the curtain. 3 men stood on the porch. One wore a camo hunting jacket, too clean to be from use. The other 2 wore hooded sweatshirts under dark tactical vests, gloves on their hands despite the heat. The man in front knocked again. "Evening, Sheriff," he said with a southern lilt that didn't match any local accent. "Just a couple of fellas looking for a lost dog." Ethan cocked the shotgun silently. "I think you've got something that belongs to us," the voice continued. "An old mutt that shouldn't be alive." Kaiser stepped beside Ethan, stiff-legged. His ears were up, nose twitching, eyes locked on the door. Then he growled, deep, feral, unmistakable. Ethan had heard that sound once before, years ago, just before Kaiser saved his life. Outside, the men moved. 2 split off the porch, flanking the house. 1 disappeared into the back. Ethan moved fast. He cut the living room lights and grabbed Luis, pulling him into the bedroom. "Stay in the closet. Lock it. Don't come out until I say." Luis obeyed without hesitation, fear etched in every line of his face. A window shattered in the kitchen. Ethan turned, raised the shotgun. Too late. A figure burst through, ducked low, and tackled him hard against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. The man was quick, wiry, dressed in black with a ski mask and combat knife. Ethan wrestled with him, elbowed hard, managed to knee him in the stomach. The attacker slammed him into a shelf, knocking down dishes and glass. The knife flashed. Then Kaiser lunged. He came in fast and silent, teeth bared, body low. He collided with the man's arm, clamping down with a growl so savage it shook the air. Blood spattered across the linoleum. The attacker screamed, twisting, trying to shake Kaiser off, but the old dog held on. Ethan recovered, grabbed the knife from the floor and jabbed it into the man's thigh. The attacker crumpled, unconscious. Kaiser released his grip and stumbled back, breathing hard, his muzzle stained red. A second shot rang out. From outside, someone else was approaching. Then a third sound cut through the chaos, the crack of a hunting rifle. The second attacker, who had been sneaking around the side, dropped with a thud. Ethan spun toward the porch and saw a familiar silhouette moving through the dark rifle barrel gleaming in the porch light. Hank Rourke. The old man wore a torn duster coat, boots caked in dust, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were steel. He chambered another round with practiced ease. "That's two," Hank said flatly. "One more out back." Ethan moved quickly, flanked around the side, and caught the third man just as he was trying to scale the rear fence. A warning shot from Ethan's pistol sent him diving to the ground with hands raised. By the time it was over, 3 men were zip-tied in the dirt, bleeding and groaning. Ethan stood above them, chest heaving, the adrenaline fading. Back in the house, Luis emerged slowly from the closet, wide-eyed. Kaiser was lying near the fireplace again, one leg bleeding from a cut but alive and proud. Hank stepped inside without being asked. He looked at Kaiser, then at Ethan. "My boy," he said quietly. He tried to tell people what those bastards were doing. Smuggling, the dogs, the kids. They made him disappear. Ethan said nothing. "I kept that rifle for 18 years, Hank added. "Waiting for something to shoot at, that'd make it worth it." Outside, the night finally settled again. Quiet returned. But inside Ethan's house, the line had been drawn. The FBI had set up a mobile operations trailer in a clearing 2 miles outside of Dry Pine, nestled between scrubby junipers and sandstone outcrops. Solar panels gleamed faintly atop the white vehicle, and antennas extended into the air like metal thorns. The desert wind carried dust and static as Agent Dean Wallace leaned over a table littered with surveillance maps and marked coordinates. His jaw was tight, his salt and pepper beard twitching ever so slightly as he stared at the satellite overlays. Ethan stood beside him, arms crossed, wearing a gray tactical shirt and a bulletproof vest that had seen better days. His eyes were locked on a cluster of red dots along the Nevada-Arizona border. Recent cartel activity traced from the USB drive hidden in Kaiser's collar. "They moved product through this route," Dean said, pointing with a pen, "and they dropped the dog near here. They either got sloppy or they didn't care if he survived." "Or they thought he wouldn't," Ethan muttered. Dean nodded. "Which brings us to the plan. We leak that Kaiser's alive and that he might still be carrying something inside." Clara sat at the edge of the table, tapping notes into her tablet. She wore dark, tactical fatigues, her strawberry blonde ponytail tucked under a black cap. There was a newfound focus in her expression, something sharpened by the attack at Ethan's house. She had bandaged Kaiser's leg herself the night before and hadn't left his side for more than 10 minutes since. "And we make sure that rumor reaches the right ears," Clara added. Dean glanced at Ethan. "You think he can handle it?" Ethan looked across the room at Kaiser, who was resting on a mat near the far wall. The dog's sable fur was matted along his side where the bandage wrapped tightly, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He sat up as if sensing the weight of their gaze. "If he couldn't," Ethan said, "he wouldn't be sitting up at all." Dean gave a slow nod. We go at dawn. Later that evening, as dusk painted the desert in amber and blood orange, the bait was quietly set. An anonymous tip was sent through a back channel used by low-level runners, a rumor that the old dog hadn't just survived, but was being kept under federal watch because they believed he still had contraband hidden inside him. Not data, not a collar, but surgically sewn packages, yet to be removed. It was a lie, but it was one the cartel couldn't afford to ignore. While the bait was planted, Ethan walked Kaiser behind the operations trailer, letting him stretch his legs. The dog limped, but his nose stayed low, tracking something. Kaiser suddenly stopped, ears twitching, and turned east. He let out a soft whine, then began pulling gently on the leash. Ethan followed. They hiked up a rocky slope and down the other side, where the desert opened up into a narrow valley framed by natural rock walls. At the far end, Ethan saw tire tracks, fresh, several sets. And next to them, faint scuff marks, signs of crates being dragged or dropped. He crouched, ran a gloved finger through the dust. This was a pass point, he muttered. Smugglers used this. Kaiser padded over to a jagged stump, sniffed it, then barked once. The sound echoed off the rocks like a signal. Ethan called Dean on the radio. "We've got confirmation. Kaiser found a drop zone." Dean's voice came back, crisp and low. "Coordinates?" Ethan read them off. "He's leading us right to them." Back at the trailer, just as the plan was tightening into place, Clara stepped outside to take a breather. She leaned against a support beam and stared at the stars. They always felt closer in the desert. She didn't hear the soft footsteps until they were almost at her side. "Don't scream," a voice said. She turned, ready to strike, but it was Luis. The boy was breathless, eyes wide with panic. "Luis, what the hell are you doing here?" "I had to come," he said between gasps. "I heard something." Clara pulled him into the shadows, away from the trailer. "Talk," she said. Luis looked around, then whispered, "One of them. One of the cartel guys. He's in Dry Pine. I recognized him from before. He used to come to my father's place. He was talking to a guy in a feed store. They said they were going to get the dog back. Tonight." "Are you sure?" she asked. Luis nodded. "They think the dog still has product in him. They're going to take him, or kill him." Clara radioed Ethan, her voice tight but controlled. "We've got an intel breach. Ethan, they know." Ethan swore under his breath. Dean responded calmly. "Then the bait worked. Time to spring the trap." Luis looked between them. "They'll come through the canyon. That's what they always used." Dean handed Ethan a headset. "Looks like your partner's going on one last hunt." They set up the ambush quickly. Ethan and Kaiser would take point, visible from the canyon mouth, appearing vulnerable. Clara and a team of federal agents would remain hidden in high-ground positions along the ridgeline, waiting for the cartel to take the bait. Kaiser stood beside Ethan at the mouth of the canyon as the stars blinked above. The dog's eyes were locked on the rocks ahead, his body tense. "Just like old times," Ethan whispered, patting his side. A breeze swept through the canyon, rustling the shrubs. Then headlights blinked in the distance. 3 vehicles. They were coming. The wind howled low across the Arizona border, stirring dust devils along the rusted chain-link fence that surrounded the old freight warehouse. The structure had once been a shipping station for copper in the 70s. Now it stood abandoned, or so it seemed. The corrugated metal groaned in the breeze, and the windows were boarded with warped plywood. It was the kind of place where things disappeared. People, crates, secrets. Inside, Ethan Cole crouched behind a stack of pallets, his Glock drawn and finger steady on the trigger. The scent of machine oil, old blood, and sun-baked rubber filled the air. Beside him, Special Agent Dean Wallace gave a silent hand signal to hold position. The team had set up hours earlier, cloaked in the silence of the dark, waiting. Kaiser, still favoring his wounded leg but eyes sharp as ever, was posted at Ethan's side. His ears twitched with every creak, his muscles taut with instinct. The old German shepherd was more than alert. He was ready. Luis was kept safe at the back of the warehouse under Clara's watch. She wore a lightweight Kevlar vest over a tactical jumpsuit, her red blonde ponytail tucked tightly under a helmet. Her green eyes were fierce, but her shoulders tense, not out of fear, but focus. She was only 28, but nights like this had aged her. The cartel convoy had arrived 20 minutes earlier. 3 black SUVs, headlights dimmed, rolled up to the loading bay and fanned out. Shadows moved with military precision. Ethan counted 8 men, possibly more, all armed, all quiet. Then came the final figure, the one who moved differently. Miguel Herrera, known in whispered reports as El Cuervo, stepped into the warehouse like a man entering his own church. He was in his 40s, clean-cut with black hair slicked back, olive-toned skin, and a neatly pressed white shirt under a flak vest. His hands, gloved in black leather, never trembled. His eyes, dark and cold, scanned the shadows with casual cruelty. Herrera wasn't here to negotiate, he was here to erase. He gave a nod to one of his men, who pulled a steel briefcase from the SUV and placed it on the warehouse floor. Ethan could just barely make out the shape inside the open crate. Plastic explosives, rigged to a small remote trigger. Dean whispered through the comms. "He's planning to torch the whole site, evidence and all." Kaiser shifted, his nose twitching. Ethan looked at him. "You feel that, boy?" Kaiser responded not with sound, but by rising slowly to his feet, ears fully perked, eyes fixed. Then everything happened at once. A shout from one of the cartel's flank guards. "Movimiento!" Gunfire erupted. First a single round, then a cacophony of automatic bursts echoing through the metal shell of the warehouse. Clara pulled Luis down behind a forklift, shielding him with her body. One round hit the side of her vest and knocked her back, not penetrating, but enough to leave her winded. Luis shouted, "Clara! I'm okay!" she gasped, crawling up to fire back. Her bullet struck a gunman's shoulder, sending him crashing into the metal rack behind him. Dean returned fire from the mezzanine, taking down another 2 assailants with clean shots to the chest. His precision was surgical. He moved like a man who had done this before, too many times. Ethan broke cover, sprinting toward the briefcase as Herrera reached for the trigger. A wall of gunfire blocked his path. He ducked, rolled behind a steel drum, bullets tearing past his shoulder. Kaiser didn't wait. The dog burst from the shadows, snarling, a blur of fur, teeth, and fury. He lunged straight for Herrera, jaws locking onto the man's wrist just as he lifted the detonator. Herrera screamed in rage and pain, trying to shake him off, but Kaiser held fast. The detonator clattered to the floor. Ethan closed the distance in a flash, delivering a solid punch to Herrera's jaw that dropped him cold. The rest of the gunmen froze, half stunned by the attack, half unsure if their leader was alive. Dean's voice boomed from above. "FBI! Drop your weapons!" Within seconds, the remaining cartel members threw down their guns and dropped to their knees. The fight was over. Kaiser limped back to Ethan, panting, his muzzle streaked with blood. Ethan knelt and pulled him close. "You did it," he said. "You crazy old dog, you did it!" Clara staggered forward, bruised but standing, helping Luis to his feet. The boy was trembling, but his eyes locked on Kaiser, wide with awe. "That dog," he whispered. "He's not like other dogs." "No," Clara said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "He's family." Dean came down the stairwell, nodding at Ethan. "Target secured. Evidence intact. We got everything." Outside, the morning light was beginning to rise, burning gold through the cracks in the warehouse. Dust hung in the air like mist, catching every ray. Ethan stood, placing a steady hand on Kaiser's back. The old dog didn't wag his tail, didn't bark in victory. He just stood tall, battered and scarred, the kind of quiet hero only a few people would ever understand. But those who did would never forget. The sky above Dry Pine was soft with gold as the first light of dawn spilled over the rooftops and lit the town's modest streets with quiet grace. After weeks of fear, silence, and shadows, the desert air felt lighter, as if justice had scrubbed the dust from the edges of things. Outside the town hall, a small crowd had gathered beneath the American flag, now freshly cleaned and fluttering high. The people of Dry Pine weren't known for making noise or speeches, but today was different. Today, they had come to honor a dog. Kaiser stood near the front of the steps, his coat cleaned, the scars along his flank still visible but healing. A deep red ribbon was tied gently around his neck, and a small silver medallion gleamed against his fur, a temporary stand-in for the official commendation he was about to receive. His head was held high, his ears alert and his stance proud, even as his leg remained wrapped in a soft support bandage. He had faced death more than once and had come out standing. Ethan stood beside him, dressed in his crispest uniform, his badge polished and gleaming under the rising sun. His eyes moved across the gathered townsfolk, faces he had known for years, now staring at him with something more than familiarity. It was respect and gratitude. At the podium, Agent Dean Wallace stepped forward. He had traded his tactical gear for a tailored Navy suit, though the desert dust still clung to his boots. The man looked tired, but composed, as always. "Good morning," Dean began, his voice carrying clear. "Today, we recognize not only the success of a critical operation, but the courage that made it possible. Sometimes heroes walk on 2 legs, and sometimes they walk on 4. A light ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. Dean continued. This town was caught in the crosshairs of something much larger than itself. A cartel operation that stretched across borders, using innocent lives as pawns, including children and animals. He glanced at Kaiser, then at Ethan. But this community stood up, and thanks to One Dog's memory, loyalty, and will to survive, we were able to finish what started 2 years ago. He turned to Ethan. "Sheriff Cole, would you come forward?" Ethan stepped up to the podium, Kaiser following beside him. Dean retrieved a small box and opened it, revealing a golden medallion engraved with the seal of the Department of Justice, a canine paw, and the words, "For loyalty beyond duty." He knelt and fastened it gently around Kaiser's neck, the crowd erupting in applause. Kaiser didn't bark, didn't move much, but he looked up at Ethan, and that was enough. Ethan took the microphone, cleared his throat, then paused. He wasn't a man of many words, but this time words mattered. "I thought I'd buried this dog 2 years ago," he said quietly. "But the truth is I buried something else, hope. Kaiser didn't just survive, he came back. And in doing so, he saved lives, exposed evil, and reminded all of us that sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from the heart of something loyal and true." He turned, placed a hand gently on Kaiser's back. "Justice," he said, "came on 4 legs." The applause was thunderous. Among the crowd stood Luis, now dressed in clean clothes, a new pair of sneakers, and a plain baseball cap pulled low. He stood beside a suited agent from the Witness Protection Division, a quiet man named Carter who had introduced himself simply as someone who makes sure you're safe. Luis looked different now, still shy, still small, but no longer hiding behind his fear. His eyes were clear and his spine straighter. When Kaiser looked his way, the boy smiled and lifted a hand. The dog's ears perked slightly. Nearby, Clara Moore stood beside a line of uniformed officers. She now wore the insignia of the Pine County Canine Unit on her shoulder, newly stitched, just a day old. She had accepted the assignment without hesitation. She had already begun working with a new recruit, a young Belgian Malinois named Tessa, but her heart would always be tethered to the old shepherd who'd taught her what loyalty really looked like. She caught Ethan's eye, gave a small nod. He returned it. And at the back of the gathering, standing near the old war memorial, was Hank Rourke. The sun caught the side of his weathered face as he watched the ceremony quietly, arms folded across his chest. He hadn't said much since that night in the canyon, but this morning he had put on his cleanest flannel shirt and polished his old boots. When the applause died down and people began to disperse, Hank stepped forward, walked up to Ethan, and tipped his hat. "My boy would have liked this," he said gruffly. "He was a fool for dogs." Ethan nodded. "He'd be proud of you." Hank glanced at Kaiser, who tilted his head toward the old man, eyes soft. "Tell that mutt he can come by my place any time," Hank added, but no peeing on my porch," Ethan smiled. "I'll pass it along." As the crowd began to fade and the sun climbed higher, Ethan stepped away from the stage and walked with Kaiser through the quiet field behind Town Hall. Wildflowers bloomed along the fence line, late bloomers pushing through the desert soil as if pulled by something unseen. They stopped near the edge of the field, and Ethan crouched down. "We're not done, you and me," he said, running a hand down Kaiser's back. "But for now, we rest." Kaiser let out a low, contented sigh and leaned into his side. For the first time in 2 years, Ethan Cole felt at peace. Sometimes God sends us miracles not in thunder or light, but in paw prints and silence. Kaiser wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that even after years of darkness, light can still find a way back. When all hope seemed lost, it was a broken, wounded shepherd, both man and dog, who stood in the gap between justice and evil, and through loyalty, love, and sacrifice, they showed us that miracles still walk this earth. Sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. In our own lives, we all face moments when we feel abandoned, scarred, or forgotten. But remember, just because the world gave up on you doesn't mean God did. He works in unseen ways, through the most unexpected messengers, and sometimes He sends a dog to lead us home. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Comment Amen if you believe in second chances, and may God bless everyone who watches this with strength, comfort, and a miracle of their own.